The applause in the school auditorium had barely faded when my grandson reached for my hand. His fingers trembled. He didn't smile the way 12-year-olds usually do after finishing a school performance. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder toward his mother, who was chatting with another parent near the exit. Then he leaned closer. "Grandpa." His voice was barely louder than a whisper. "Please don't send Mom any more money." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. "What?" His eyes darted back toward Melissa. "Just follow her," he whispered. "You'll understand." Before I could ask another question, Melissa walked over wearing the same warm smile she'd shown me for 6 years. "There you two are," she said cheerfully, slipping an arm around Ethan's shoulders. "Wasn't he wonderful tonight?" Ethan immediately went quiet. The confidence he'd shown only seconds earlier disappeared. Melissa looked at me. "We should probably head home. He's got homework." I studied my grandson's face. He avoided looking at me altogether. Not because he was distracted. Because he was afraid. As they walked toward the parking lot, Ethan looked back only once. He didn't wave. He simply held my gaze for a moment, then climbed into the passenger seat. I stood there long after their car disappeared, hearing the same sentence echo in my head over and over. "Please don't send Mom any more money." I had spent 6 years believing every one of those yearly payments was protecting the only piece of my son Daniel that remained in this world. Now, for the first time, I wondered whether I'd been protecting the wrong person. 6 years earlier, I buried my only son. Daniel was 35 when a sudden illness took him from us. Everything happened so quickly that none of us ever accepted it. One week he was coaching Ethan's baseball team. The next, I was standing beside a gravesite trying to understand how a father was supposed to say goodbye to his child. A few days before he passed, while machines hummed around his hospital bed, Daniel squeezed my hand. "Dad, promise me they'll be okay." He never had the strength to say anything more. I promised him anyway. That promise became the center of my life. Every January, without fail, I wired Melissa exactly $55,000. She always thanked me. She always told me the same story. "Ethan's education is getting more expensive. Medical insurance keeps going up. Everything costs more now." I never questioned her. If anything, I apologized for wishing I could send even more. I postponed trips I dreamed about after retirement. I delayed renovating my old house. I watched my savings grow more slowly than they could have because I believed every dollar was helping my grandson build the future Daniel wanted for him. Melissa made sure I stayed informed, but only through her. She sent carefully chosen photos, school pictures, birthday snapshots, Christmas mornings. Every image looked normal. Every update sounded convincing. Whenever I suggested taking Ethan fishing or spending an entire weekend together, Melissa always had a reason. "He has tutoring. He's staying with friends. We already have plans." As the years passed, our visits became shorter. Birthdays turned into quick lunches. Holiday dinners became dessert only. Phone calls were always on speaker. If Ethan started telling me something interesting, Melissa somehow appeared nearby. "Come help me for a minute. Time to leave. We're running late." I convinced myself she was simply overwhelmed by single parenthood. Looking back, I can see something else. Ethan never asked me for anything. Not a bicycle. Not a gaming console. Not expensive sneakers. Nothing. His jackets looked worn. His backpack had been stitched together near one strap. I noticed those things. I simply explained them away. Melissa always said she was teaching him humility. Now his whispered warning gave every one of those memories a different meaning. That evening, I sat alone in my living room staring at the framed photograph of Daniel and Ethan taken just weeks before Daniel died. I promised I'd take care of them, I quietly said to my son's smiling face. Then another thought entered my mind. What if taking care of them meant finally asking questions? For 6 years, I had trusted without hesitation. Tomorrow, for the first time, I was going to follow my daughter-in-law. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Ethan's whisper. Just follow her. By sunrise, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. Melissa had lost her husband. She had raised Ethan alone for 6 years. Maybe my grandson had misunderstood something. Maybe he was upset about a disagreement between them. I wanted there to be another explanation. Because the alternative meant I had spent 6 years failing both my son and my grandson. I poured myself a cup of coffee and looked at the photograph sitting on my kitchen counter. Daniel was laughing in it. Melissa had her arm around him. Ethan was sitting on Daniel's shoulders. It looked like a family that would always stay together. I don't want to believe this, I quietly admitted. But the memory of Ethan's frightened eyes wouldn't leave me. Later that morning, Melissa called. "Hi, Harold." Her voice sounded as warm as ever. "I just wanted to thank you again for coming yesterday. Ethan was so happy you made it." I smiled politely, even though she couldn't see me. "I wouldn't have missed it." She laughed softly. "Things have been difficult lately. Between school expenses and everything else, I don't know what I'd do without you." That sentence would have reassured me a week earlier. Instead, it sounded rehearsed, almost automatic. We talked for another minute before she ended the call. "Daniel always knew he could count on you," she said. The line went silent. I sat there staring at my phone. Daniel trusted me. Melissa had said those words for years. Whenever I asked about finances, Daniel trusted me. Whenever I wanted to spend extra time with Ethan, Daniel would have wanted consistency. Whenever I offered to pay the school directly, "It's easier if I handle everything." Each time I'd backed away. Not because I believed the explanation, because hearing my son's name made me feel guilty for questioning her. I suddenly realized something. She had never answered my questions. She had simply reminded me of my promise. The next afternoon, I stopped by Ethan's school before dismissal. I stayed across the street where no one would notice me. Children began pouring through the front entrance. Parents waited beside their cars. School buses lined the curb. Then I saw Ethan. He walked out slowly with his backpack hanging from one shoulder. He looked around. Not for Melissa. For someone else. An older woman waved from a gray SUV. Ethan walked toward her without hesitation. I recognized her after a moment. Melissa's older sister, Karen. She hugged Ethan, opened the passenger door, and they drove away. Melissa wasn't anywhere in sight. That surprised me. But maybe she had to work. I reminded myself not to jump to conclusions. That evening I called Melissa. "I happened to be near Ethan's school today." "Oh." I saw Corinne pick him up. Melissa answered almost immediately. "She's just helping this week." "Only this week." The explanation sounded reasonable. Until I remembered Corinne had picked Ethan up 3 months earlier when I'd visited unexpectedly. Melissa had given me the exact same answer. "Just this week." The words were identical. I didn't mention that. Instead, I simply said, "That's nice of her." She changed the subject before I could ask anything else. 2 days later, I invited Ethan to lunch. Melissa agreed, but only if she came too. We met at a small diner Daniel used to love. For the first 20 minutes, Melissa answered nearly every question before Ethan could. How's school? He's doing great. Any new hobbies? He's been so busy. I looked at Ethan. What book are you reading right now? Melissa opened her mouth. Before she could speak, Ethan quietly answered. The Outsiders. His voice was barely above a whisper. You like it? I asked. He nodded. Then he glanced toward his mother, almost asking permission to continue. He began. Melissa interrupted with a smile. He doesn't read much outside of school, you know boys. Ethan lowered his eyes. A few minutes later, Melissa stepped away to answer a phone call. The moment she reached the entrance, Ethan leaned across the table. I don't stay with Mom very much. I stared at him. What do you mean? I mostly stay with Aunt Karen. Why? He swallowed. I don't know. When does your mom come home? He shrugged. Sometimes late. Who helps you with homework? Aunt Karen. Who takes you to the doctor? Aunt Karen. Before I could ask another question, Melissa returned. What are you boys talking about? Ethan immediately picked up his fries. Nothing. Melissa smiled. Ready to go. He simply nodded. The drive home felt heavier than the lunch itself. For the first time, I wasn't wondering whether something was wrong. I knew something was. The only question was how much. The following morning, I hired a professional driver. I couldn't risk Melissa recognizing my truck if I decided to follow her. As we sat parked a short distance from her neighborhood the next afternoon, Melissa walked out of her house carrying a designer handbag and wearing sunglasses. She climbed into her SUV and drove away. My driver started the engine. We stayed several cars behind. A few minutes later, he frowned as he watched her turn at a major intersection. Then he looked at me in the rearview mirror. Sir? Yes. He pointed toward the traffic light ahead. She's not heading anywhere near your grandson's school. My driver stayed 3 cars behind Melissa's SUV as she crossed downtown. I expected her to turn toward Ethan's school at any moment. She never did. Instead, she entered the city's most expensive shopping district. Luxury storefronts lined both sides of the street. Designer clothing, fine jewelry, upscale home decor. The kind of places Daniel and Melissa had never visited while he was alive, because they always joked they couldn't justify spending that kind of money. Pull over, I quietly said. Melissa parked outside a boutique where the handbags in the display window cost more than my first pickup truck. She stepped out confidently, adjusted her sunglasses, and disappeared inside. 20 minutes later, she emerged carrying 2 glossy shopping bags. Not long after that, she entered another boutique. Then another. There wasn't a child in sight. There weren't any school supplies. No pharmacy. No grocery store. Nothing that suggested she was running errands for a growing boy. My stomach tightened. Maybe she was buying gifts. Maybe there was a sale. I kept reaching for explanations, because accepting the obvious felt impossible. But each new stop made those explanations weaker. Around lunchtime, Melissa parked outside an exclusive restaurant overlooking the river. 4 women greeted her with hugs before they disappeared inside together. My driver looked at me. You want to wait? Yes. I'll find somewhere nearby. We parked across the street, where I could clearly see the outdoor dining terrace. I pulled a baseball cap lower over my face and walked to a small cafe next door. From there, I could hear pieces of their conversation whenever the wind carried their voices. For nearly an hour, nothing seemed unusual. They laughed, compared vacation photos, complained about work. Then one woman raised her glass and smiled at Melissa. "I still can't believe your father-in-law sends those yearly deposits." The others laughed. I felt my heart stop. Melissa laughed too. "Oh, Harold," she said casually, "he's predictable." Another woman shook her head. "Seriously, every year. Like clockwork. You've got to tell us your secret." Melissa leaned back in her chair. "It isn't really a secret." She took a sip of wine before continuing. "You just keep him focused on Daniel." The table grew quiet. She smiled. "If I start talking about how hard everything is, and remind him what Daniel wanted." She shrugged. "He never asks questions." One of the women frowned. "Doesn't he ever want receipts or something?" Melissa laughed again. "He tried once." "What happened?" "I reminded him that Daniel trusted me." The women chuckled. "And he apologized." More laughter erupted around the table. I couldn't move. For 6 years. Every conversation, every question, every hesitation. She had known exactly which words would stop me. Not because they were true, because she knew mentioning my son would make me feel guilty. Another woman leaned forward. "So he really believes every penny goes to Ethan?" Melissa rolled her eyes. "Of course he does. What about your new business?" Melissa smiled proudly. "It would have never gotten off the ground without those yearly transfers." "What if he finds out?" "He won't." She didn't hesitate. "He doesn't investigate people. He's too sentimental." I lowered my head before anyone could notice me staring. I suddenly understood why Ethan had whispered instead of speaking openly. If Melissa was comfortable joking about me like this with friends, what happened behind closed doors? I quietly paid for my coffee and returned to the car. My hands shook as I opened the passenger door. The driver looked at my face. "You okay, sir?" "No." I took several slow breaths before answering again. "I've never been less okay." As Melissa and her friends left the restaurant, I discreetly photographed her carrying luxury shopping bags. I photographed the restaurant, the valet ticket, the boutique receipts she briefly pulled from her purse while searching for her keys. Nothing illegal. Just facts. Facts I should have asked for years ago. We followed her for another hour before she finally drove home. She never stopped at Ethan's school. She never visited Corinne's house. She never picked up her son. The entire afternoon had been about herself. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. The guilt I'd carried since Daniel died had become something else. Determination. If Ethan had risked warning me, I owed him the truth. My phone rang before we reached my neighborhood. The caller ID displayed the name of the private investigator I'd hired that morning. I answered immediately. "This is Harold." The investigator's voice was calm. "Mr. Bennett, I found something you need to know." "What is it?" There was a brief pause. "It isn't just where Melissa spends her afternoons." My grip tightened around the phone. "It's about where your grandson has actually been living." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "What do you mean?" I asked. The investigator didn't answer immediately. "I'd rather show you the documentation than explain it over the phone." My heart sank. "Is Ethan all right?" "Yes." The relief lasted only a second. "Physically, he appears to be." That choice of words stayed with me for the rest of the drive. An hour later, I was sitting across from the investigator in his office. He slid a thick folder across the desk. I started with school records. I opened it. The first page listed emergency contacts. I immediately looked for Melissa's name. It wasn't first. Corinne Bennett, Melissa's older sister. Second, Corinne's husband. Melissa's name appeared last. I frowned. There has to be a mistake. The investigator shook his head. I verified it with multiple records. He turned another page. Attendance records. Another. Transportation forms. Another. Authorized pickup list. Corinne's name appeared over and over. Melissa's appeared only occasionally. How often has Corinne been picking him up? I asked quietly. According to the records, for several years. Several years. Not 1 week. Not a temporary arrangement. Years. The investigator continued. I also spoke with neighbors. I looked up. Several believed Corinne was Ethan's primary caregiver. I closed my eyes. All those afternoons. All those excuses. All those promises that Melissa was simply busy. None of them had been true. The investigator opened another section of the file. Now let's talk about the expenses. He laid several documents beside each other. You've been told Ethan attends an elite private academy. Yes. There isn't one. I stared at him. What? The school Melissa listed on several funding requests closed before your son passed away. I blinked. Then where has Ethan been going? He handed me another enrollment record. A perfectly respectable public school. I looked at the tuition amount. 0. No yearly tuition. No massive enrollment fees. No international academic program Melissa claimed required additional funding. Just an ordinary neighborhood school. The investigator wasn't finished. Medical expenses. He placed another file in front of me. The insurance claims don't match the figures Melissa gave you. I compared them. The difference wasn't a few $100s. It was tens of thousands. Routine checkups had become emergency treatments. Simple dental work had somehow transformed into expensive specialist care. I felt sick. And tutoring. He slid another sheet toward me. The company she listed doesn't exist. I stared at the blank space where an address should have been. No office. No registered business. Nothing. Every year, Melissa had shown me invoices. Every year, I believed them. The investigator quietly added one final stack of papers. I also compared your bank transfers with publicly available information. I already knew what I was going to see. Luxury resort reservations. International flights. Designer purchases. The dates matched almost perfectly. Within days of every $55,000 transfer. I leaned back in my chair. I paid for those. The investigator didn't answer. He didn't need to. The evidence answered for him. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I looked at him. I need to see my grandson. Without Melissa present. Yes. He nodded. That's probably wise. The following afternoon, my attorney arranged a meeting at his office. Corinne brought Ethan. Melissa wasn't told. When Ethan walked into the conference room, he hesitated for only a second before running toward me. I wrapped my arms around him. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. When we finally sat down, I asked the question that had haunted me since the school performance. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He stared at his hands. I wanted to. What stopped you? He swallowed. Mom said you'd stop loving us if I complained. My chest tightened. She said if I made you angry. His voice cracked. You'd leave like everybody else. I reached across the table and took his hand. Ethan. He finally looked at me. I never believed her, he whispered. But I was scared to find out. Tears filled my eyes. You never have to wonder that again. He nodded slowly. I only told you because. He paused. Dad would have wanted you to know. Those words broke something inside me. Not because they reminded me of Daniel. Because they reminded me of the promise I had made to him. A promise that had never been about writing checks. It had been about protecting his son. I looked at my attorney. I don't want another dollar transferred to Melissa. He immediately made a note. I'll contact your bank today. Freeze every scheduled payment. It'll be done. As we finished discussing the legal steps, my cell phone vibrated on the conference table. Melissa. Her name filled the screen. I answered. Hello. Her tone was pleasant. Almost cheerful. Hi, Harold. I said nothing. I was checking my account this morning. Another pause. I noticed this year's money hasn't arrived. I didn't answer Melissa immediately. The silence stretched long enough for her to speak again. Harold. I'm here. Was there a problem with the transfer? There is now. She laughed softly, as if I'd made a harmless joke. I'm sure it's just a banking delay. No. My voice stayed calm. There won't be a transfer this year. The laughter disappeared. What are you talking about? I think we should discuss it somewhere appropriate. What does that mean? My attorney's office. Another pause. Attorney. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Her voice sharpened. Harold, this is ridiculous. If you want to understand why the money stopped, be there. I ended the call before she could say anything else. The next morning, Melissa arrived exactly on time. She walked into the conference room carrying an expensive leather handbag I'd seen her buy only days earlier. She smiled politely. Harold. No one smiled back. My attorney sat beside me. The private investigator was already there. Melissa's eyes narrowed. What is all this? I folded my hands on the table. For 6 years, I believed every annual payment was helping Ethan. It was. We're going to find out. My attorney slid the first folder across the table. School records. Melissa barely glanced at them. I've already explained those expenses. You don't need to explain expenses yet, my attorney replied. Please explain why your sister has been listed as Ethan's primary emergency contact for years. Melissa blinked. Corinne helps. For years, he asked. She hesitated. Sometimes. He opened another folder. Transportation records. Another. Authorized pickup forms. Another. Attendance documentation. Each page told the same story. Corinne had been the constant. Not Melissa. Melissa looked at me. Harold, you're making ordinary parenting decisions sound suspicious. I remained silent. The investigator placed another stack of documents in front of her. The private academy Ethan supposedly attended. Melissa nodded. Yes. It closed before Daniel passed away. Her face changed. Only slightly. But I noticed. So, the investigator continued evenly. Would you like to explain how Harold has been paying tuition to a school that no longer exists? Melissa looked from one face to another. There must be some paperwork mistake. There isn't. My attorney calmly pushed another document forward. The tutoring company. Melissa immediately answered. They were wonderful with Ethan. It isn't registered. What? It has never existed. Her confidence began to crack. I spoke for the first time in several minutes. I trusted you. She looked at me quickly. You still should. I wanted to. I've done everything for Ethan. I slowly slid several photographs across the table. Designer boutiques, luxury shopping bags, restaurant receipts, vacation reservations. Each date matched one of my annual transfers. Melissa looked down without touching them. You followed me. No. I verified what my grandson warned me about. She looked genuinely startled. Ethan. Yes. He doesn't understand adult finances. No. I leaned forward. But he understood enough to tell me to stop sending you money. For the first time since entering the room, Melissa had no immediate response. My attorney quietly placed the final spreadsheet on the table. Every annual transfer, every major purchase, every vacation, every failed investment into the boutique business Melissa had started 3 years earlier. The timelines lined up almost perfectly. I watched her eyes move from one page to another. Then she whispered something I never expected. I was going to pay it back. The room fell completely silent. My attorney spoke first. Which part? Melissa covered her face with both hands. I never meant for it to get this far. I closed my eyes. For 6 years, I had imagined dozens of explanations. This wasn't one of them. Not because she admitted spending the money. Because she admitted she had always known it wasn't hers. I stood slowly. My greatest regret isn't losing the money. She looked up hopefully. It's realizing my grandson spent 6 years believing he couldn't tell me the truth. She lowered her eyes. I would have helped you if you'd simply been honest. She didn't answer. Because there was nothing left to say. Over the following weeks, everything changed. I immediately canceled every future transfer. Instead of sending money through Melissa, my attorney established a protected trust for Ethan. Every educational expense would now be paid directly. Medical bills would be verified before payment. If Ethan needed tutoring, sports equipment, college tuition, or anything else that genuinely benefited him, the trust would pay the provider directly. Not a single dollar would pass through Melissa's personal accounts. Based on the evidence available, my attorney also began pursuing recovery of funds that had been misrepresented over the years. Whether every dollar could be recovered remained uncertain, but Melissa no longer controlled the narrative or the money. News spread through the family faster than I expected. Relatives who had defended Melissa called me after seeing the documentation. Several admitted they had believed she was making endless sacrifices as a single mother. Corinne quietly apologized for staying silent. I thought she'd eventually tell you the truth, she said. I should have said something years ago. I wasn't angry with Corinne. She had given Ethan stability when someone needed to. My anger belonged somewhere else. A week later, Ethan came to spend his first full weekend at my house without anyone limiting the visit. We rebuilt the birdhouse Daniel had started with him years before. We went fishing at the same lake where Daniel caught his first bass at 11 years old. That evening, Ethan looked at me across the backyard. You still came. I smiled. I always will. He walked over and hugged me. This time, no one interrupted us. On the 6th anniversary of Daniel's passing, Ethan and I stood together in front of his grave. The morning was quiet. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. I rested my hand on the headstone. "I thought keeping my promise meant sending money," I said softly. "It didn't." Ethan stood beside me. "It meant protecting your son." I looked at the boy Daniel had loved more than anything. For the first time in 6 years, I knew I had finally kept the promise I'd made in that hospital room. Not by trusting without question, but by finding the courage to protect the person my son loved most.